British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
And there you have it, the recorded sound of Big Ben in Downing Street. We are no longer a member of the European Union. The scenes there in Parliament Square, where the celebrations begin. And so begins the next chapter for the United Kingdom. We have now formally left the EU after 47 years. We are no longer EU citizens.
Welcome to the Cycling Europe podcast. It's number 13, I think, and it's the 1st of February today, the morning after the night before. Brexit has happened, and ironically, I spent last night talking about the wonders of cycling across Spain and Portugal as a member of the European Union. Today, I am no longer a member of the European Union, which, well, doesn't make me very happy, but this is kind of therapy, because I'm driving to Matlock. In fact, I'm there now, Matlock in Derbyshire, and I've come down here to have a chat with somebody called Helen Moat. She's a writer, and she has written about her own trip across Europe. Whoa, very steep hill. Here we go, found the road. Right, number 26, where are you? Helen.
It is. Come in.
Thank you.
Would you like a tea or a coffee?
I'd love a coffee would be perfect, thank you. Oh.
Come in here, and then we'll go in here so that we're not disturbed.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry I'm a little bit late.
Coffee, do you take it with milk?
Black, just black, no sugar, nothing.
Oh, right.
Perfect.
Strong or weak?
Oh, as strong as it comes, please. Hi.
This is my husband, Tom.
Hi.
Hello.
There's another one there somewhere.
Yeah.
I think he's hiding. He doesn't want to be part of the podcast. It's the one who came with me. He lives in Leamington.
This is indeed episode 13 of the Cycling Europe podcast. We'll be back in Matlock in a few moments to hear about Helen's cycle across Europe. But once we have, we'll also be talking to another author, Anna Hughes, who wrote about her own two-wheeled adventures in the book Eat, Sleep, Cycle. She's now the founder of Flight Free 2020, and I'll be asking her if such an initiative can really make a difference when it comes to climate change. I've also been talking to the poet Caroline Burrows about her literary-themed cycles around the UK. But first, we return to the Peak District to talk long-distance continental cycling.
I'm Helen Moat. I'm an ex-teacher. I am a freelance writer. I write for magazines like BBC Country File and Wanderlust's website. Also the author of Slow Travel the Peak District. And I've written a book called The Time of Birds about my cycle across Europe.
Okay, now this cycle across Europe, which you've written about, and we'll talk about the book in a few minutes, what motivated you to think about cycling across Europe? It was back in 2015 you did the cycle itself. So what was the initial motivation? Why did you decide to do this?
Well, there were two things really. First of all, I was in a job that I was deeply unhappy in, so it was my escape route really. But secondly, I'd read your book, Andrew, and that really motivated me. And I'd read another book by a guy called Nick Hunt who actually walked to Istanbul. and I really wanted to do that trip. I didn't want to walk it because it would take too long. In fact, when I spoke to my brother, who's a really keen cyclist, he said, and I told him I was going to cycle to Istanbul. He said to me, Helen, why are you cycling to Istanbul? You're not even a cyclist. You never cycle, you walk. And I said, yeah, I haven't got the time to walk, so I really want to cycle out. So that was the motivation.
And in terms of preparation, there were actually a few factors that you missed out there. Firstly, you're married and you've got 2 kids, and in effect you kind of left your husband for 3-4 months to do this. You also went with one of your children, which must have taken a bit of persuading at least.
Yeah.
And also, by the sounds of it, reading the book, you didn't actually, you didn't buy an expensive bike or anything like that. By the sounds of it, you just kind of went into the garage and picked the first bike that you saw.
That's right. So I was completely unprepared, first of all, because I was writing my slow travel guide to the Peak District for Brat. So, the night before, I was still writing edits for the book. And at the same time, I was throwing stuff into the panniers, totally unprepared. Had done very little, a little bit, but very little practice. I knew nothing about bicycles. I didn't know how to fix one. I filled the tires up with slime and hoped for the best. I was unprepared. But Tom, I was really lucky. He was really supportive. To be quite honest, he didn't in one way want me to go, but in the other way, he did want me to go because he has always encouraged me to be my own person and grow. And so he was really supportive on that level, but it was really hard for him. He was left with my younger son who was doing his A-levels at the time, and he had to run the house basically by himself.
Had you done any cycling or any long-distance cycling prior to setting off for Istanbul?
Very little, a little bit of cycling around Derbyshire. I did a 3-day trip the year before with my son, in that we cycled down to my sister who lives in Hertfordshire. So we did the Sustran 6 route. Well, we started from the door, and then we went to Derby and headed along the canals and the back roads to Hitchin in Hertfordshire. And that was all I'd done, really.
And didn't you worry that actually physically you might find this a bit more of a challenge? Getting all the way to Istanbul is very different from having a 3-day cycle to Hitchin.
Absolutely, and I talk about this in the book. I talk about my Baldric-esque cunning plan. So my plan was to cycle the Rhine, and I figured out it would be pretty flat. And you've done it, haven't you? It is flat, isn't it? Yeah. And then I thought, well, by the time I get to the Danube, and most of it will be quite flat, I will have hopefully cycled myself into fitness. The bit that really worried me was crossing the Balkans. You've got proper mountains there, of course. And the bicycle, actually, that I used was a sit-up and beg bike, and we jokingly called it the tank. And it was really hard getting up the hills and that. It was completely stupid to take a bike like that. And when I got home, I actually changed it to a more suitable hybrid. But, I got there.
And how did you persuade your 18-year-old son to go with you?
So when he was 15, I sort of had this idea already that I would do this cycle. And I said, would you come along? And he, as a 15-year-old, said, without really thinking, yeah, I'll come with you. So he had sort of made that promise, and I think, he felt he should stick to it. So he very kindly came with me, even though it wasn't his dream at all.
So the idea of doing it was actually 3 years before you set off?
Yeah, the idea came a long time before I left. And I think I was so deeply unhappy in my job. It was kind of this thing that kept me going. I thought, it will see me through to when I can actually retire. In the end, I ended up suffering from depression, and I left school one day fully expecting to go back the next week, and I never went back again. But it actually worked out really well for me in the end. The cycle sort of and the book opened doors for me as a result. So
he kept his promise 3 years down the line. Did you keep pestering him over the years? Hey, you've promised to do this. We're going to do it in 2015. Don't forget. Or was it kind of, was he encouraging you to do it, or?
No, not at all. We didn't actually talk about it. And then I guess his final year in school, when he was doing his A-levels, and he'd decided he was going to have a gap year. He went to work in Dubai for a while. And I said, do you remember we talked about doing this trip? Would you do it with me? And he said, yeah, I'll do it. But as I said, it wasn't his dream. He just came because he made this promise. So yeah, even though we hadn't talked about it beforehand, he was still happy to stick with that promise he had made, yeah.
And why did you choose Istanbul as a destination? Was it simply because it was when you look at a map of Europe, it's kind of the furthest you can go? Or was there a reason for heading to Istanbul? And what about the rest of the route? Did you plan that in advance, or was it very much made up as you were going along?
Well, the first bits were very clear, cycling the Rhine and cycling the Danube, and I did get all the bike books that come with that. The second part, from Constanta on the Black Sea to Istanbul, we talked about long and hard, because I have to admit I have a phobia of hills. I know you really enjoy them, don't you? And you encourage people to do hills, but I had this complete phobia, and we were trying to work out the flattest route through the Balkans, and most long distance cyclists, they tend to go via the coast, but that's a lot hillier getting into Turkey. So we did a very different route from most people, sort of flattest pass we could find.
So the hills were certainly the most challenging aspect of it. How about in terms of motivation, in terms of morale? Were there parts of the journey where you thought, oh God, I just want to be home and back in my normal life, back in Matlock?
Very rarely. I mean, we headed out at the beginning of May and it was just beautiful. There was sort of the time of year when everything's becoming green. The bird song was amazing. The life on the river, the wildlife on the rivers. It was just beautiful, and I just loved it. I really loved it, going out every day. The only time it got a bit more difficult was when we were in Bulgaria and Turkey, where it became a bit more hilly, and the heat by that stage was July, so it was very, very hot. But yeah, I loved it. I really loved it. I loved being, I guess you feel the same. There's this thing about being outdoors all day. And for someone who suffers to some extent from mental health issues, you're just living in the moment, and around every corner there's something new to see. And I just loved it, actually.
Yeah, I can completely sympathise with that. It's that getting up in the morning and just being somewhere completely different and a fresh new day, and you don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Accommodation. Now, you didn't take any tents with you.
We did.
Oh.
But we just didn't use them very much. Oh, you haven't got to that bit yet.
Well, I thought I've got to the bit where the book is split into two parts, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and I've literally just now arrived at the border with Hungary, I think.
There's Slovakia, probably.
Slovakia, that's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. And you've just taken delivery of some tents.
Yeah.
But you didn't take them with you, did you?
So what happened was, apart from the Danube and Rhine, we actually headed down the Inn and another river to get to the Salzach, I think, to get to friends who live near Salzburg. I'm thinking, we're doing thousands of miles, what's another 100 miles? So we just cycled down there to visit them. And my friend and my husband were scheming. He came out and surprised me. I had no idea. I just thought I was visiting Maria and Chris. And he came out with tents. And then the thing is, do you do a lot of wild camping, or do you tend to stay? No. So I had this phobia actually about wild camping. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. And actually, when you get to Eastern Europe, there are very few campsites. I think we only found one on the way. And there's a story in that as well. But so we ended up doing couch surfing, which was really incredible, because I think you get a slice of real life. So if you're cycling, even to some extent, you're still a tourist, you're still not really engaging with communities, but by staying with people in different countries, I really saw how they lived, and they took me out to, to a pub or a cafe to meet their friends, and that was just wonderful.
And you stayed with quite a few friends along the way, because you studied German at university, I think.
That's right.
And presumably that brought you into contact with lots of contacts across Germany and Switzerland.
That's
so
right.
certainly in that first half of the book, that was very useful to have those people to stay with.
And I think that's really true. Yeah, I had friends that I stayed with in Germany, Switzerland and Austria. And, I have this love for Germany and Switzerland because I've lived in those countries, and Austria as well, because I have friends there. So definitely that was... I'm very aware that I write about the Germanic countries almost, well, probably as much as Eastern Europe, because I have all those connections there and I have those stories. I was very keen in the book to tell the stories of the people I knew who lived in Europe and the people I connected with along the way. They had some really interesting stories to tell.
Do you think then, because I haven't read that second half of the book yet, do you think the journey in the second half, because you were in more unfamiliar territory, was it more of a challenge? Was it a very different journey to the one you'd had up until arriving in Slovakia?
Yes, I think that's really true. I talk about this in the book, those very strong connections I had in the Germanic countries because I'd lived there, because I have friends there, because I speak the language. But in Eastern Europe, there was this sort of nervousness. I don't speak any of the languages there. I don't know anybody there. But it was still really enriching, those contacts I made through couch surfing, and I didn't know that area, so obviously it opened up a whole new world to me that I didn't know. But yeah, it did feel different.
Did you try warm showers at all?
I might have looked at it, but I don't think there were too many people who were participating in Eastern Europe. But yeah, that's a really good organisation. We have hosted people here in Derbyshire from that organisation.
That's useful to know. I might give you a call one day.
Yeah, and, you'd be very welcome, Andrew. I really haven't been active recently, but yeah, I must sort of, I think tell people that I'm available again here in Derbyshire.
Well, I now live in Yorkshire, back up in Yorkshire where I come from, which is a far nicer place to visit in terms of a cyclist than Reading, where I used to live.
Yeah.
And I used to get loads of people contacted me in Reading through warm showers.
Yeah.
But I think I've had one since I've been back up in Yorkshire over the course of the last 5 years, because it's not on the route to anywhere. I used to get loads of people because they were going from London to Oxford and they wanted somewhere to stay overnight. Did you have, or do you have any stories, any curious stories of people that you met through couch surfing, people who were interested in inverted commas, who you had some interesting experiences with?
So many. And I really wanted the people that I met through couch surfing to be a big part of the book. I mean, when we got off the ferry at Europort, the first people we stayed with was a crazy Israeli guy who had married a Dutch woman. And he was just such a character and full of stories. And the story that he told about how he had got to the Netherlands and how he met his wife and how it all fell apart and then they got together again. I mean, he was just an incredible character. And then in Eastern Europe, there were two people I stayed with, a guy who was on the west side living really close to the wall. And he had some incredible stories to tell about growing up, in the shadow of the wall and knowing nothing about Eastern Europe on the other side. And then at the same time, a few days later, I was staying with Kat, who was in Eastern Europe and knew nothing about Western Europe, and her experiences of growing up in the communist system was really interesting as well. And then we got to Turkey and we stayed with two twins, and they had an interesting story as well because they were born in Bulgaria and received, I suppose, prejudice there, and then they moved back to Turkey again. So there's so many stories, and it was just, such an honour to stay with these people and find out about their lives.
Was it always the plan to write a book when you did get back to the UK?
I had a vague idea that I would like to write a book, even before I set out. I really wasn't sure about how I could achieve that, because I know that, I don't know whether you would agree, but I think the market for cycling books is, a little bit past, and that you get trends in writing, don't you? And I had an agent and she was saying, Yeah, I'm not sure about the cycling part. I think you should focus more on your memoir. And the book is actually, it's got two narratives. There's the story of the cycle, and then there's a second narrative about my childhood in Northern Ireland, my relationship with my father. I don't want to say too much because you haven't read the second half. And, you know, I think it's okay to say that he died literally at the end of my journey, a few days after I reached Istanbul. So there's two narratives going on there. And so, yeah, that I had the idea to write the book, but I hadn't worked out the narrative until I got home and how I would go about it.
Yeah, because it's not an obvious thing to mix a cycle journey with your reminiscences of growing up in Northern Ireland, but I have to say you do it very well. You kind of reflect upon people that you meet, and that jogs or seems to jog your memory for things that had taken place back in Northern Ireland when you were growing up. You've done it pretty seamlessly, I have to say.
Thank you. I mean, for example, just to clarify what you mean, for example, in Croatia, the part of Croatia we were travelling through, you know, the 1995 war, I think. It, you know, it was still very visible. There were houses still, you know, covered in bullet holes, and there were woodlands with signs still up that they were unexploded landmines, I suppose. And so that was really evident. And so I was thinking about, you know, we met a guy who was still very bitter, a Croat, about what the Serbians had done to him in his experience. And so, you know, it made me think of my own childhood growing up in Northern Ireland and the Troubles and the similarities and the differences, the difference being the scale of the war there was so much more horrific than what was happening in Northern Ireland. So, yeah, I say, you know, there's a lot of what happened on the journey that sort of, you know, links in with my own past, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember cycling through Croatia, I think it was, and if you move away from the coast, you do see a lot of derelict buildings.
Yeah.
I remember this one village where there were holes in the buildings, and I couldn't really figure it out until I got closer and realised that there were shells, and they'd just simply been left, and there were brand new houses next door. Yeah. And then further down, I came across a war memorial, and we're used to seeing war memorials with the dates of the people who were killed, 1903, 1910, 1915, that's when they were born. But the people on this war memorial, almost all of them were born in or around the same year as me. And that was a chilling moment to realise that, oh, wow, you know, these people are my generation of people. And to think that was in Europe, it was a really fascinating but disturbing part of that, my journey, which was around the Mediterranean for that one, but it was interesting.
And you know, I think we often focus on the Second World War, but you know that we've had wars in Europe much more recently, particularly in the former Yugoslavia. So, you know, I personally feel that the peace that we have had since then is something really precious, and having grown up in Northern Ireland, it's something we shouldn't take lightly. You know, it's quite an achievement that we have this peace in Europe today.
Well, yeah, and let's hope that, you know, the Brexit thing that's just happened is not going to impact on that, although I fear it might, but for not perhaps in our lives, but 50 or 100 years down the line, if the disintegration of Europe were to gain momentum, then I think that's a real risk, and that's a real, well, it would be a tragedy if that were to happen again.
And it is a possibility, but I think, I mean, someone said that if something isn't in our living memory, we tend to sort of become very detached from it. And, you know, thinking of the Second World War, there are not many people left who actually experienced it, never mind, you know, fought in the war. But it is striking that those that did fight in the war really have, you know, said it's so important that Europe stays together, you know, that they're united. And I think that's an important message from people who did fight in the war.
Did you find it difficult to write about the Northern Ireland stuff in the book?
Yeah, I'm hesitating here. I didn't find it difficult to talk about the politics of Northern Ireland and the Troubles. I think it was more difficult talking about personal things. Very aware of family who are involved in politics. But I did at the same time, I did feel it was important to tell my story and my perspective of it. And, you know, as I said to my own family, it's really, we all have our stories and we all have our own view of the world. And I think it's important that all those stories are told, really.
And the book itself, you have a background in writing. Like you said at the beginning, you write for magazines, you write for travel. You'd written some travel guides or a travel guide about Derbyshire.
That's right.
But writing a travelogue is actually quite a different thing. Obviously, it's a lot longer. There's probably more personal things in there. Mm-hmm. It's less objective, a lot more subjective. Mm-hmm. How did you find that? Did you find it a challenge? Did you enjoy it? Did you find some real challenges in there?
I find it quite easy. I mean, a lot of the work I do for magazines is very much, you know, factual information. So I really like the freedom. I don't often get to write narrative travel pieces. So I actually really enjoyed writing a narrative. So yeah, I didn't find it hard. Yeah, it was hard work. It took a long time. There was lots of editing that went on, but I really enjoyed writing it, yeah.
You've done one long journey. Have you done any? Well, I assume you've done one long journey. You might have done more. Have you done any other long cycles since coming back from Istanbul?
So, I mean, you mentioned my husband, who very kindly let me disappear for 3 months, and I did promise him I wouldn't do that again. So we kind of have to cycle together, and he's working in a proper grown-up job, unlike me. But we've agreed that and he's not really a cyclist, it's not really his thing, but he's very kindly agreed to do some cycling holidays with me. So not last year, the year before, we did the Danish part of the Baltic route, and that was amazing. Have you done it to Denmark, across all the islands to Copenhagen? Have you done that route?
Well, yeah, because that was when I cycled from Tarifa to Nordkap.
Yeah.
I went through Schleswig-Holstein and then turned right when I got into Denmark, and island hopped along the southern side of Denmark to Copenhagen.
Yeah. It's well, if you like islands and you like going on ferries and crossing bridges, it's just beautiful. I love that trip. So yeah, what I'd like to do is the Baltic Sea route in stages. I won't be able to do it in one go, and this year we're planning to do the German stretch and hopefully get to see all those countries eventually that I've never been to, like Lithuania and Latvia and so on, Estonia. So yeah.
Will you be better prepared? Will you have a different bike? Will you go camping? Will you, I don't know, will you approach it in a very different way?
No, my husband hates camping, so we definitely won't be camping. I think we'll do the same thing. We'll probably do some couch surfing if we can, if there's that possibility, just stay in B&Bs and guest houses. But yeah, I've got a better bike now that is much more suitable for hills. Not that there are many hills on the Baltic Sea in Germany of any significance. So yeah, better prepared. I'm still rubbish with bikes, Andrew. I don't know if you're a good mechanic. I haven't the first clue about bikes. I was absolutely amazed in the Istanbul group cycle that I didn't once have a flat tire. You know, I know I had the slime in there, but no issues at all. There were some minor things, and we visited a bike shop. My son had lots of issues with broken spokes, which can be a bit of a problem for people cycling long distance with panniers. But yeah, lots of stories about that as well, trying to get someone to fix spokes. But I think you have a story or two of your own on that issue.
By the sounds of it, the bike that you were using, perhaps it was just made for rugged commutes to the shops and the potholes that bikes like that have to contend with, rather than the smooth roads of Europe.
I don't know. I mean, I told you about the guy in the Netherlands, the Israeli guy. And he took one look at my bike and he said, Helen, this is a bike to cross town with, not across a continent. But it was pretty reliable, even though it was totally unsuitable for hills, and it didn't seem to have any problems with the potholes. I mean, Western Europe is just brilliant for cycle paths, and they're all beautifully smooth. And then you get to Eastern Europe, and it's, the paths and the roads are full of potholes, and yeah, it managed very well. This is how often it's used.
Oh, right. So
this is a replace. So it wouldn't be very easy to get to, Andre.
Well, no. I mean, I can see it in the back.
Yeah.
So it's the white giant at the back.
It's the white giant at the back.
Ah, right. And I can see immediately why you didn't have any punctures. Mm-hmm. Because you've got Schwalbe Marathon Plus tyres.
That means nothing to me. Explain.
Well, Schwalbe Marathon Plus tyres are fantastic.
Really?
I used them on the 3 trips that I did across Europe, and I had 1 puncture.
Yeah.
In 15, 16, 17,000 miles. So that is why I was going to ask you inside, but that is why
I wouldn't have known anyway.
that's why you didn't have any punctures, because they're brilliant tyres.
Yeah. I had no idea.
Well, it doesn't look actually. I mean, it doesn't look that old actually, is it? Had you bought it quite soon before the ride?
Yeah. I have to admit, I was completely mad, and I bought it for the cycle. So totally unsuitable, but I just had this thing I wanted to sit up and bike. It was completely daft. And then as soon as I got home, I have a friend who was keen to do cycling. Actually, we talked about doing cycles since. We did the Hadrian's Wall route. Have you done that one? Which is a really nice cycle across England. I was started to get out of the cycle trails we have in the Peak District. There are lots of lovely cycle trails. I thought, yeah, I can do these hills. So I bought a bike that could actually get up the hills, and that's the one. It's not a very expensive bike either, but it's a hybrid, and it's much more suitable for climbing hills.
How did you fix the panniers onto your Giant, the one that you took to Istanbul?
Yeah, there is a place at the back where you can attach it. But I didn't even have decent panniers, and since then I bought Ortlieb. I don't know what you have.
Yeah.
But I had to unstrap everything at time. I took things off, but they weren't waterproof. And, now I've got decent panniers as well.
Well, you'll have to dig it out for when you do your talks in your publicity tour, because people will want to know, because that's actually one of the things about the book. One of the nice things is that you didn't go on a kind of an expensive touring bike or whatever. You went on a slightly different bike, so that's one of the features of the book that people might be interested in.
Yeah.
So you might have to dig it out and put it in the back of the car when you do your talks.
And though you can see I never use it these days, but I wouldn't sell it. I'm really attached to it. I'm very attached to it.
Yeah, well, I haven't used my Reggie for 3 years now.
But you've still got him.
But I wouldn't sell him for ever.
You've done so many adventures with him, though.
Well, yes, yeah, he's a character.
Yeah.
Mind you, if somebody wants to make me an offer.
If it's high enough.
The bike must have been a topic of conversation, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely. We travelled with a really interesting older British couple who loved cycling, and there's plenty of stories about them as well. But Aris, the lady, was quite forthright, and she, she looked at my bike and said, "Helen, did you purchase that bike beforehand? Did you choose it to do this cycle?" And just stopped short of saying, "This bike is totally unsuitable for what you were doing." But what was good about the bicycle was you were very much upright and you could see around you. And we didn't race across the continent. We definitely stopped a lot. We did detours to visit places. And I'm a real advocate for slow cycling and just taking your time. I know other people love to get the mileage in and, see what they can achieve in the day. But for me, it was all about engaging with your environment and really enjoying the journey. And with a sit-up bike sitting up straight, you could certainly see very well around you.
Have you had any comments back from the people who you did meet? For example, Iris, she's one of the characters in the book you just mentioned. Has she read what you've written about her? Or has she got that surprise to come when the book is published?
Yeah, Iris and Brian, I'm afraid I lost contact with. I tried to get in contact with them. I only had an email address. I don't think they do social media. So I've not been able to get in contact with them. Quite a few of the people that I met through couchsurfing throughout Europe, I'm still in contact with them. I wrote to them and said I'm writing the book. I asked them if they were happy for me to use their own name or whether they'd rather I used a different name to protect their identity. So there's been, lots of communication afterwards, and I'm sure some of them will buy the book.
Where does the name come from? A Time of Birds, or will I discover that in the second half?
It will become more apparent in the second half. It's I talk about it a little bit in the first part. So my father loved birds, and really because he died at the end of the journey. I think the book, in a way, is a lot of it's about him and his love of birds. And when I was growing up, I didn't really pay much attention. I wasn't that interested. But, since he became ill, since when he was ill before he died, I sort of thought more about my childhood and my relationship with him, and particularly his love of birds. And cycling along the Rhine, especially setting off in spring, you're so aware of all the birds around you, and the storks and the herons that you see, and various birds along the journey. So that's a very important part of the book.
When is the book published?
9th of April. For the first time, thinking about the Brat book, I actually have a publicist, someone who actually organises the publicity for me, which is rather nice. I don't have to do it myself.
Is that something you're looking forward to?
The publicity part? Yeah, I with the other book, The Slow Travel, the Peak District, I've done quite a few talks with that. I prefer to write. I'm an introverted person to doing public speaking, but I kind of just get into it, and I enjoy it. I usually dread it beforehand, and then when I do it, I actually enjoy it.
Okay, well, good luck with the book, and thank you for having the chat.
And thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you.
In 2011, Anna Hughes cycled around the coast of Britain 4,000 miles, and she subsequently wrote the book Eat, Sleep, Cycle. She's also sailed around the coast of Britain. She cycled Land's End to John O'Groats, that was back in 2015. She cycled from Dieppe to Mont Ventoux and gone at Mont Ventoux 3 times. She's written the book Pedal Power, which is subtitled Inspirational Stories from the World of Cycling. She's a Get Outside champion for Ordnance Survey, and she has now founded an organisation called Flight Free UK, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to the podcast, Anna.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
What is Flight Free UK, and what are you trying to persuade people to do in 2020?
So we're a behaviour change campaign, and we're looking at the environmental impact of aviation and trying to encourage and inspire people to fly less, specifically by not flying at all for the year of 2020. So it's kind of, we liken it to veganuary. So that's when you would take a month and you would just be vegan for that month. And hopefully that might influence some of your future behaviour. So that's the idea. By taking a set time away from something, it might influence future behaviour or give you kind of more information about a particular thing. We've kind of framed it as this challenge. Essentially, we are looking at a highly polluting activity, flying, and we're trying, first of all, the campaign aims to inform people about the carbon impact of flying, but also to inspire them to travel by other means. So it's definitely not you can't travel. It's definitely not you're bad if you fly. It is just giving people information and trying to inspire them to think about things differently and explore the other options that are less carbon intensive.
Is this an initiative that has worked at all elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, so it started in Sweden 2 years ago now. So I started it here in the UK about this time last year. And in Sweden, I think it's fairly well known now that there has been a bit of a movement away from flights, and that has been reflected in the general shift in transport modes there. So last year there was a 9% drop in domestic flying in Sweden. more people taking the train instead. There was a 4% drop in overall flying, which is quite good as well. Yeah, we see that government and industry responds to this. So as a result of a growing flight-free movement, alternative travel options are becoming a bit more frequent, or a bit more available. So some night trains, for example, have been reinstated across Europe, which is great. The Swedish government did have a debate recently to whether they should scrap APD so that's air passenger duty, in order to re-attract the passengers to flying. And they decided they wouldn't do that because that would be environmentally irresponsible. So that's fantastic. That shows that people power does work. It shows that the choices that we make can be reflected by the decisions that are taken at a higher level.
Now, I'm no fan of flying. I reckon that in my life, if you had this scheme in all the years of my life, I could probably have signed your pledge 40 times, I reckon, at least. But this summer I'm off to Japan to cycle the length of Japan, and I've obviously bought myself a ticket to fly to Japan and then obviously back home in August. Am I really the problem? Am I really the person who you need to be persuading to stop flying? Bearing in mind that actually I'm a pretty green person, and certainly when it comes to flying, am I really the problem?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are lots of people like yourself who fly very little, if at all, and the occasional long haul flight is not going to tip the balance in terms of global emissions. That's not where the problem really lies. There are a certain number of people who are frequent flyers and fly regularly, perhaps several times a week. So this is really where the impact would lie. However, every single flight that you take does have an impact. It does have a carbon footprint, and it has a significant carbon footprint, especially if you're flying a long haul. So we've been told that in order to be sustainable globally, we need to each be emitting no more than 2.5 tons of carbon per year. And that's a recommendation by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. When you look it up, you'll see that a return flight to Japan per passenger generates 3 tons of carbon dioxide. So you've already kind of busted through that budget. So yes, someone who flies very infrequently isn't going to create that social shift that we are aiming for. They're single-handedly not going to reduce emissions significantly. However, if we're looking at our individual carbon footprints, we can see that there are many things that we can do to reduce them, and not flying is a huge part of that. And also, we mustn't forget the influence we have on other people. So if you choose not to fly and you talk about it, then you will reach people who perhaps are part of that frequent flyer group. So some of my friends are frequent flyers, and by virtue of me not flying, they perhaps think about the impact themselves and will perhaps cut down on the number of flights they take. So, behaviour change, it doesn't start all at once. It kind of starts with the people who perhaps are already switched onto this, and then just by virtue of their actions can start to spread a message about how one would live in a low carbon way.
Now, you refer on your website to people like me as, and I think I quote, we are the lower hanging fruit. You persuade people like me because, we are persuadable, and I look forward to many adventures, certainly within Europe, where I don't have to take a flight in the future. And you've kind of touched on this already in that you suggest that by me modifying my behaviour, people who do fly frequently, they will, as a consequence of seeing me not doing it, they might be persuaded themselves. That is more hope than expectation. Are there concrete things that you can do which might potentially persuade the 15% of people who make up the 70% of flights? For example, higher taxes or making it very inconvenient to fly, things like that, which from my perspective seem sensible, but perhaps from their perspective probably aren't, and certainly from the government's perspective might be difficult to implement.
Yeah, there are loads and loads of things we can do. Our campaign is based on behaviour change, and there are studies that show people who know someone who's stopped flying, they are more likely to reduce their own flights. So in terms of behaviour change, these are really concrete things we can do. But what you're referring to is more policy, and absolutely, yes, we definitely need that. So we're working with other campaigns who are asking for a better, fairer taxation system, we're pushing for the government not to scrap APD, which is what they've been talking about because of the recent collapse of, or recent troubles in Flybe. It's quite galling that a government would throw money at a very highly polluting business at a time of climate crisis. So that's something that we're really pushing against. There are a certain cohort of people who just won't change their behaviour, no matter how many people around them do. And that's just nature, that's human nature, that's what happens. So for those people, yes, it's going to be hitting in the pocket. That is more what's going to persuade those people. It needs to be both of those things, though. We need to do bottom-up campaigns, which is what ours is. We need to do top-down regulation and incentivization, and that's where the government and industry can step in. By showing that there is a public desire for this, or a need, or a want, or a trend away from flying, we can persuade and influence government and industry to make the changes that we really, really desperately need to see. It's kind of, one doesn't really happen without the other, but we all need to work together and address all of those things at once in order to be successful.
Isn't the real solution to the whole aviation thing, the best solution, the long-term technological change that will inevitably come through development of things like e-planes and biofuels and things like that?
Interesting. So technology can help. It won't solve the emissions problems that we have. In basic terms, technology developments can't keep up with demand. So even if we were able to upscale electric planes, even if we were able to upscale biofuels, that we wouldn't be able to cope with the demand and the projected growth in demand that we're going to be seeing in terms of aviation. And we can't forget that these alternatives also have an environmental impact. So e-planes, it takes a lot of technology, a lot of raw materials to make the batteries that would power the planes. Even if it's solar, you still need storage for the power. So that's not without environmental impact. But on a practical level, you're never going to get a long-haul e-plane. You might be able to use short-haul e-planes, and actually for short hops like Isle of Man to mainland Britain, like the Outer Hebrides, etc. Those kinds of planes, yeah, definitely bring it on. It should already be happening, and it is to an extent, but it's moving very slowly. If we compare it as well to e-cars, if electric technology was that viable, we'd already all be driving around in electric cars, and we aren't. So to kind of hope that might happen for aircraft it's a little bit too far in the future, really. Biofuels, similarly, it takes fossil fuels to make biofuels, and biofuel often is palm oil, which is a leading driver of deforestation, and that's a disaster for the environment. So we can't pin all our hopes on these green technologies, these green fixes, which aren't really that green after all. And mostly, fundamentally, we don't have time. We've been given a warning that we have a decade to drastically slash our emissions. And all that's happening is airports are expanding, airlines are projecting growth, and they're trying to appear green by saying we offset our emissions, so you can travel carbon neutral, which, by the way, there's no such thing as a carbon neutral flight. We're still doing this with a decade left to slash our emissions. There's no chance that technology is going to develop at scale in that time in order for it to become a viable solution.
You're preaching to the converted in terms of me, because I do feel genuinely guilty about flying to Japan and the impact that has, and I think, should I be thinking about some other kind of journey? But bringing it back to the cycling, you're a cyclist, I'm a cyclist. Do you think by deciding to opt out of taking planes, it is still possible to have some great exotic adventures on a bicycle?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time in Japan. The cultural difference and all of everything you'll see, I'm sure it'll be remarkable and wonderful. We can still have those experiences closer to home, though. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we want from travel? What do we want from adventure? And my response is, I want to learn new things. I want to learn about myself. I want to see things. I want to see remarkable things. And I can do all that wherever I am. So my adventure of a lifetime was cycling around the coast of Britain. Part of my my motivation for doing that was because I didn't want to get on a plane to have an adventure, but also because I felt like that it was wrong of me perhaps to learn about another country when I knew so little about my own. So I decided I would undertake a voyage of discovery here within the UK, and oh my goodness, it blew my mind. And it kind of, rather than giving me license to then travel further afield, it kind of made me a bit more, I just want to see everything here, and I haven't, like, one lifetime is just not enough to see everything that even the UK has to offer. I do understand that that there are lots of other things that we can discover, and especially here in the UK, the weather isn't particularly reliable all of the time, although, I got an amazing tan from doing that ride, so obviously the sun does shine here. But then we do have Europe on our doorstep, and even Northern Africa and places like that, so we can have that exotic, that cultural difference, which is very eye-opening, and it's really good for us to learn all these things. So all my cycling adventures have been within Europe, and I mean, in the past I have traveled across to New York before. That's the furthest I've ever been before I stopped flying, and I know that I will probably never go to America again unless I take a cargo ship or I sail, and that's fine. I was talking just the other day to someone who said that they had been to Thailand and they had just had the best time, and they just thought it was the most beautiful place they've ever been. And I said, I've never been to Thailand, but I say that a lot. This is the most beautiful place I've ever been. And I say that about places like Mallaig on the west coast of Scotland. I say that about Nice, which is where I went in the summer just this last year. You can say that about anywhere. Anywhere you go will be the most incredible place that you've ever seen. It doesn't have to be halfway around the world to count. I would really urge people to try and discover what is on your doorstep.
We are both going to be speaking at the Cycle Touring Festival this year in Clitheroe in May, between the 22nd and the 25th of May. And the theme of this year's festival is going to be travelling light, not flying, looking what's on your doorstep rather than great adventures, which are perhaps a bit less carbon friendly.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to speaking, actually. And I'll be speaking specifically about the adventures in the UK that I've done. But also, if I manage to get it ready, I have a video of my trip up Ventoux. So that might be in the video section, which would be great. I think it's fantastic that this is the theme of the Cycle Festival this year. And there are lots of other festivals, actually, that I've been made aware of recently that are now starting to talk about being flight free or flying less, and I think it shows that the awareness is raising, and that there is an appetite for this, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and I'll be speaking about my own trip last summer, which involved no flights, down to the Isle of Wight on the train, taking the ferry to northern Spain and cycling through northern Spain and Portugal, and then all the way back up to Yorkshire on the train again. So yeah, it can be done, and I had a great time, as I'm sure you did. Now, just to finish off with, if anybody wants to, and hopefully they will, want to sign the pledge or find more information about Flight Free UK, where can they go and how do they do it?
So we have a website, flightfree.co.uk, and the pledge tool is on the front page, so you can just sign there. We also have Twitter at FlightFree2020. We're on Facebook, FlightFree UK, and Instagram as well, at FlightFree2020. So there's loads of places you can get involved in the conversation. You can find out lots more about the campaign and why we're doing it on our website. So yeah, hopefully lots of things, interesting things. And in fact, on the website itself, on our Be Inspired page, we have lots of blog posts from people who travel by other means, and hopefully people will find that very inspiring, and kind of a little bit of background on why we're doing it and why this is important.
And even like me, if you can't sign up in 2020, hopefully you'll continue, and there'll be a possibility of signing up and pledging to have a flight free 21, 22, etc.
Yeah, that's the idea. We haven't quite decided how we're going to structure it in the future, but we think that the model of just taking a year off is actually quite good in terms of inspiring behaviour change. So that's the idea.
Caroline Burrows is a student and occasional teacher of creative writing who decided to pedal across the north of England, taking in destinations that had literary connections. These included the Forest of Bowland, inspiration for Tolkien's Middle-earth, Haworth, which is the Brontes of course, Goatland Station, as featured in the Harry Potter films, and Whitby with all its links to Mary Shelley and Dracula. And last year she completed a mini Wilfred Owen odyssey that hopefully she'll tell us about in a few minutes. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Caroline.
Oh, you're welcome. It's nice to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you too. And we did meet at last year's Cycle Touring Festival, didn't we?
Surreptitiously, I didn't realise you were in the room till afterwards, and you gave me a shout out, which was really nice of you to do. So I think I was in too much panic about giving a talk, so I wasn't aware of what was going on outside my head.
I included you on my list of top 10 things I learnt at the Cycle Touring Festival, and one of them was to combine your cycle touring with some other passion you have in life.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. And you also mentioned another chap that finished off the festival that was combining cycling and climbing. So, yeah, it's quite interesting to hear other people doing that kind of thing as well.
Have you always been a cyclist?
Yeah, on and off. A lot of I think I'm lucky that I'm a child of the 70s. There were fewer cars and parents used to kind of tell you to go away for the day. So me and my little brother would go out on our bikes. We lived in Nottingham for a while, which, was home of Raleigh then, and my dad worked there for a little bit. So I just got quite a lot of memories of bicycles and tearing around streets with other kids from the area. So, and my granddad's a massive cyclist, actually. He's still going. He's 93, but he's not on a bike now. But that only stopped about 5 years ago. He still had his 50-year-old Claude Butler, I think, for forever. So it's sort of family genetically programmed to ride a bike, yeah.
Before you did these literary tours, you actually, you've done some serious cycling, I think in South America, is that right?
Yeah, I cycled across some of Argentina. I had a little bit of a Che Guevara romance era in my head. So I'd been to Mexico on a bike tour with a friend and a small group as well. And I went to see where Che Guevara and the ship that they sailed to Cuba went from on the coast of the Yucatan on the Granma. And before that, I'd been on one of the organised bike tours in Cuba. So that was more kind of Che Guevara stuff. And then I kind of finished it off. These are all a couple of years apart. I finished it off with 3 months in Argentina, sort of finding where Che Guevara had grown up as a kid and cycled around from Cordoba, heading out towards Mendoza. Some of the roads were a bit too scary to be on a bike on a road. They were a bit like motorways. So there was a bit of long distance bus help on that tour, but quite a bit of it was on bike on my own, yeah.
So when you came to do the literary cycle tours, you weren't actually a novice by any stretch of the imagination?
No, cycling was it's like an obsession really, isn't it, for everyone? Once they get the bug, it's quite a good obsession. So I'd also done tours in the UK, like there's one I did that I called the Tour de Family. So I was living in London at the time and I cycled up to Glasgow and I tried to visit as many distant relatives as possible over the course of a week. And I got 4 roast dinners in a week, so that was fabulous. And I quite often would sort of do a 60-mile radius of London and go to gigs in Cambridge or Oxford or Brighton just to get a bike ride in. Yeah, I would just cycle quite a bit actually, or at lunchtimes go out and do circuits of Regent's Park on my bike when I lived in London. So yeah, a little bit full on with it, to be honest, sometimes.
So you're a pretty experienced cyclist. Now, can I just point out that we are recording this on what must be one of the windiest nights of the year so far. So if you're listening to this and thinking, God, are they standing at the top of Ben Nevis or something? We're not. I'm in my front room and Caroline is in Lancaster and we're doing this over Skype. The wind is coming down my chimney like nobody's business, which is why perhaps you can hear the wind. Back to the cycling. What inspired you to embark upon your literary cycle tours?
So that literary cycling tour of the North that I did, that I sort of called From Jane Eyre to Dracula, I'd done an Open University undergrad degree and all the modules were in literature. And when I'd finished that degree, when I'd handed in the final project, 2 days later, I was on a train up to the north because I'd noticed that a lot of the authors or a lot of the books were actually set in the north of England, and my parents live there. So I thought I could connect the dots that way, because a lot of people do the coast to coast route, the sea to sea, don't they? So I thought I could do something similar, but taking in the sort of landscapes of the writers that I'd been studying, that I'd really enjoyed, and that I hadn't necessarily thought to read before the university course. You get forced to read things, and sometimes that's great because you read stuff you wouldn't normally be interested in. So it was to kind of go through the landscapes of what I'd read in these books, really.
And when you were cycling, did you actually take the books with you, and did you reread the stories as you were cycling?
God, no, because that would have been way too heavy. The panniers were heavy enough. I'm usually mocked for carrying everything on the panniers anyway. If you need a bit of repair kit, I'm usually the person to ask. I had a Kindle at the time, or Nook reader, so I was reading bits and bobs from that to refresh. But it was straight after I'd finished the final year of the undergrad, so the books were very fresh in my mind anyway, because I'd been writing about them in exams. But I went and visited Howard for Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, and I reread those books quite regularly anyway. So it was fantastic being in that wild landscape. Also horrific because the weather was bad and it was really hilly, but it really kind of made the books come alive. So.
And what's the reaction of the people that you meet along the way when you explain that you're doing this cycle from wherever to wherever, but you are doing it with the specific intention of joining up all these literary connections? What's people's reaction?
Sometimes it's really wonderful. Like I've got one friend who's going to probably copy the same journey, but I'm going to recommend she avoid some of the hills that I went up. So most people are quite enthusiastic about, oh, that's a nice idea to go, and not just, because there's nothing wrong going out just for a bike ride, but I think because I'd done this degree and was really into literature anyway, I think that combining that can make it an even more enjoyable experience in a way, because it's not just about how fast you're going or how high up the profile or anything like that. It's kind of, I live in my imagination quite a lot anyway, so most people seem really quite interested in it, or they want to talk about their experience of the books as well, and that's just a lovely conversation to have with anyone talking about books and how everyone interprets them quite differently sometimes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Wilfred Owen's trip and where that took you, and what kind of cycling did that involve?
Yeah, so the Wilfred Owen Odyssey, so as well as having a crush on Che Guevara, I have a serious love affair with Wilfred Owen, even though he's 100 years dead. So the Wilfred Owen, because I was living up in, well, I am still in Lancaster. I knew that he'd gone to school in Birkenhead and that there was a Wilfred Owen story museum there. And when I looked into more of his history, I could see a sort of triangle of places Wilfred Owen had lived or been born, or where his parents had lived in the UK. So I saw that I could get to Birkenhead, and where he went to school, grammar school, and then Oswestry, where he was born, and then Shrewsbury or Shrewsbury, depending on which part of the country you're saying it from, where his mum got the news that he'd been killed the week before Armistice when the bells were ringing. So I could see that it was kind of a circular loop. It was kind of sad, because thinking about Wilfred Owen's story is always a bit sad, but his poems are so visual, and it was just nice to kind of see what his life was like before all the World War I history of him, because he's more than just a World War I poet. You know, he's got this lovely sort of childhood being out in the countryside, and Oswestry's an interesting place with a beautiful statue they've put up of Wilfred Owen, and it's got lots of little, he's holding out sort of a stream of papers in brass or bronze, whatever the statue's made of, and the local school kids have written their own poems or copied out Wilfred Owen poems on them, so it's really a kind of beautiful statue to remember him by. So that was the idea behind it, really. I was in between, I had a holiday break from university, it was Easter, and I thought I can fit a mini Wilfred Owen Odyssey in, but now obviously I need to go over to France as well and see some of the more war orientated stuff to do with his history.
I think at this point it's probably quite a good idea if we take a slight break from the conversation and we listen to the poem that you wrote all about that trip.
This poem's called A Wilfredoan Odyssey, a Spring Cycling Offensive by Caroline Burrows. My bike's fully loaded, my own pack mule, a pilgrimage of Wilfredoan poetry, riding south between the Pennines and the Irish Sea, I set my sights for distant Liverpool. You can't miss it, says a man, I ask for directions, casting his curse, I get lost different ways, till I skirt Leyland where tanks were once made, I'm relieved I've survived it through Preston. Spring lambs bounce around flat fields in the Ribble near two crows ganging up on a baby squirrel. The B road takes me over 6 screaming lanes to a scouse bus honking with offensive disdain. In Birkenhead, a statue called Futility shows a man with his head in his hands who sat with a wreath of paper poppies in his lap. The bronze remains dull, although it's sunny. Expecting a veteran, I meet a musician who went to the B.I. Wilfred's old school. Only a wall remains where a cruel head caned kids for breaking archaic rules. In his Wilfmobile he shows me locations. Did you know a dead famous poet lived there? The people living inside couldn't care. Then it's back to the Wilfred Owen Museum, hearing how he's adapted poetic rhythm into a Wilfred Owen musical. Near Chester I rest in a cyclist cafe, where a roadie shows me a safer greenway, past the cemetery where rows of soldiers fill, uniform graves standing to attention. Despite the forecast, there's miles of cold wet stuff, but warm showers greet me at Oswestry from members of that cycling community. There's Wilf's birthplace, another statue, an exhibition, a plaque, a park in the church where he prayed. A Wilfred lemon and poppy seed cake was made by the librarian, 2nd place in a bake-off. I wait by a country field as cows are unloaded. One runs bellowing. It's separated. In another truck is its baby calf. It's quieter when I reach city grass outside Shrewsbury Abbey, whose bells when they were ringing War's End. That's when Wilfred's mum got news he'd died. At a pub B&B I stop cycling. In the bath the acoustics sound great being read. Wilfred Owen by Richard Burton on YouTube before bed.
That's a really beautiful piece of poetry, and if people want to listen to that again, it is available on YouTube. Do you have a website or do you have social media accounts?
Yeah, I've got on YouTube, Instagram and Twitter, it's all under the same name. It's called Verse Cycle. So verse as in poetry and cycle as in bicycle. So at Verse Cycle you'll find me. Most of the poetry is on the YouTube channel. There's some videos and other poems there, and on Instagram and Twitter there's a thing I'm trying to do, which is to be environmentally friendly for a year. So I'm trying to write a verse a day, and how difficult it is to try and be environmentally friendly. It's the trials and tribulations and small successes of it. So that's more on the Instagram and Twitter.
That certainly includes some cycling references, because I was reading through those earlier. I can recommend verse 119 and verse 123, for example. But anyway, what about the future? What plans have you got to do more cycles of these literary adventures in the future?
Yeah, I do actually. So part of my trying to be environmentally friendly, I've bought a secondhand bike trailer from someone on eBay, so that I'm probably moving house soon. So I'm going to try and move house by trailer, which means that I really need to downsize all of my possessions. And then after that, I'm hoping to try and just head off on the bike. Usually being a teacher in the past, I usually plan everything down to the nth degree, and I want to try something different and just go off with a tent and see what happens, see if I'm able to not have to plan everything and know my distance and know where I'm staying every night. So I'm hoping to try and get to the ferry dock, and I love getting the ferry across to France or maybe down to Santander, and try and find out who the local poet or local literary writer was from that area, and read something about them and go, sort of immerse myself in that, and then maybe write stuff about my experience of going to a place and finding out about a writer I didn't know about, and how it differs or is the same to over here. So it's kind of, I suppose, like the north of England tour, but on a bigger scale, but with less planning.
That sounds like a brilliant idea, and good luck with that. I'm sure you'll find, wherever you go on the continent, I'm sure you'll find lots of literary connections, whether they be in France or Spain or elsewhere.
Yeah, it'll just be like sort of educational, really. I really like I used to read quite a lot of Anne Mousteau's novels. Is that the right name? Anne Mousteau, that would do a cycle tour, and she'd do stuff based more historically on like the Amber Trail or old Roman roads and stuff like that. So something a bit like that, but following around writers, really, I suppose. Yeah. And maybe seeing if I can read some of my poems on the way, maybe if I can roll in somewhere and read some poetry out and sustain myself that way. I don't know. An impoverished cycling poet. We'll see how I fare. I'm sure it'll be really interesting. Actually, people are usually lovely. People are usually absolutely lovely when I'm out and about. So yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it.
Well, that's exactly what Simon Armitage did, didn't he? In that that journey he made along the Pennines, you could be poet laureate one day.
Yeah, or maybe just an excellent campaigner for cycling routes that follow literary trails or something. Yeah, but yeah, the Simon Armitage book, I think it's called Walking Home. That's really inspiring, actually, that he did that, and would just rock up in places. I think social media can be used quite helpfully that way. I saw a good talk at last year's cycle tour and festival with Tom Allen. He was trying to get from Bristol up to Scotland without using any money, and sort of using Twitter and Facebook, I think, to help connect with people. So social media can be used in that way, I think, in a really nice, interesting way. And when I bought the bike trailer, it was off a chap on eBay, and when I told him what I wanted to do with it, when he sent the sort of delivery note when it was going to come over, he wrote it as a poem. So I thought, how fabulous would it be if everyone communicated with me in verse? You can dream.
Well, yeah, on that positive note about social media, thank you for talking to the podcast, and good luck with your future plans.
All right, thanks for talking to me, Andrew.